At 72, I pretended to be broke and hid the $2 million, just to see my grandchildren's reactions. She woke up that morning with a certainty that had taken decades to form. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It wasn't a passing anger. It was something that had grown slowly like a plant nobody saw sprout, but that suddenly is too big to ignore. Martha was 72 years old, with completely white hair and the clear conscience of someone who had spent her whole life doing good. But that morning, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom where she had slept for 46 years, she thought, what if I made it all disappear? Not her, of course, just the money. The $2 million that nobody knew exactly where they were. What if she pretended she had nothing left, just to see what would happen? The idea scared her at first. Then, as she drank her coffee with milk and looked out the kitchen window at the garden she tended herself, the idea turned into a plan. And the plan turned into a need. It had all started 3 weeks earlier on a Saturday afternoon. Justin had called. Her grandson, Susan's oldest son, 28 years old, handsome, smart, with a smile she always thought he had inherited from his grandfather. She answered with a full heart, as she always did when she saw his name on the screen. "Grandma, I need to ask you something." She didn't say anything yet. She waited. She had learned to wait. "It's just that Tiffany wants to remodel the living room. You know how it is, right? We're building a life together. We want to make the apartment prettier. We were thinking around $3,000. She stayed quiet for a second. Then she said she'd see what she could do. Justin thanked her, said a quick goodbye and hung up. He didn't ask how she was doing. He didn't ask if she had seen the doctor that month, which she had mentioned in an earlier conversation she had a follow-up appointment. He didn't ask anything. Martha held the phone in her hand for a while. She counted the months since Justin had shown up without asking for something. 4. 4 months without a visit, without a genuine call, without a message that didn't start with, "Grandma, can you?" And she always could. She had always sent it, because he was her grandson, because Arthur would have done the same, because she thought helping was a form of love. But that Saturday afternoon, something shifted inside her. Arthur had passed away 6 years earlier, without suffering in his sleep, just like he always said he wanted to go. He left her everything they had built together over 51 years, a lifetime of honest work, of a company built from scratch, of right choices made in hard times. The children knew there was money, but nobody knew exactly how much. That was an old habit of Arthur's, who said that money exposed in a family turns into poison. Martha had kept that habit after he was gone. She had 2 daughters and a son. Susan, the oldest, was Justin's mother. The other 2 were Brenda and Stephen, who lived in faraway cities and showed up for the holiday parties. With all of them, Martha had a relationship of real affection, but also of natural distance. What she hadn't been able to accept was what was happening with her grandson. Justin had grown up in her house. He spent his vacations there, slept there, learned to play bridge with his grandfather, learned to bake cake with her. There were photos of him as a child all over the living room. There were memories Martha kept with the same care she kept the antique china in the cabinet. But in the last 2 years, since Tiffany had come into his life, the Justin she knew seemed to have left too. Not that she blamed Tiffany alone. Justin was an adult. He made his own choices. But it was hard not to notice that the calls asking for money had started after they got together, that the visits had decreased at the same pace. That when they did show up, Tiffany looked at Martha's house with a look she couldn't quite describe, but that she could feel. "Look, I need to be honest here. There are things we discover over the course of life that hurt differently. It's not the betrayal of an enemy. It's the distance growing between you and someone you loved as if they were a part of you. That carries a weight that's hard to put into words." So Martha called Gladys. Gladys was 68 years old, had been Martha's neighbor for over 30 years, and was the kind of friend you can count on one hand, the one who tells you the truth when everyone else stays quiet, the one who shows up when no one else does. The 2 of them had coffee in Martha's kitchen, and Martha told her everything. The request for the $3,000, the 4 months of silence before it, the feeling that she was being used. Gladys listened patiently. Then she said, "Martha, have you thought about just stopping the money?" "I have. But then I keep wondering if I'm the one overreacting. You're not overreacting. I've known you for 30 years. It was Gladys who planted the seed. Not on purpose. It was just a passing remark while she stirred her coffee. Sometimes you only find out what a person's love is really like when you take away from in front of them whatever it is they're after. That phrase stayed in Martha's head for 3 weeks. And then the plan was born. She went to her CPA, a trusted man she had worked with for decades, and she talked to him. She asked him to prepare documents that would give the appearance that her financial situation had changed. Not forgeries, nothing illegal, just a strategic reorganization of information so that any outside observer would see a woman who had liquidated her investments to cover old debts from her husband's estate. A plausible story. A story that anyone who wanted to believe it would believe. Then she went to the branch where she had her account and reorganized everything. The real money was carefully moved to where only she and her CPA knew it was. In the account that the children and grandchildren knew about, a small amount remained. Enough for day-to-day life, but nothing that suggested wealth. Then she waited. She didn't have to wait long. Susan, Justin's mother, called the following Wednesday. Someone had mentioned to her, it wasn't clear who, that Martha was going through a tough financial situation. Susan wanted to know if it was true. Martha took a deep breath and said yes, that she had discovered some old unresolved matters that Arthur hadn't taken care of, that she had needed to use almost everything to keep her name clean, that she was fine but that her money had shrunk considerably. On the other end of the line, silence. Then Susan said, "Mom, you should have told me sooner." Martha said she didn't want to worry anyone. Susan promised they would talk more, that she would stop by on the weekend. But the weekend came and went and Susan never showed up. She sent a text saying something had come up. That's when Justin called, not to ask how she was doing, to say that, given the situation, maybe it would be better to postpone the living room renovation because he was also feeling the pinch financially. He said it in a different tone, drier, as if he were reporting to a stranger. Martha said she understood. "Okay, Grandma, we'll talk later." And he hung up. She sat staring at the living room wall, at the pictures of him as a child on that wall, at the framed piece Arthur had hung there, which had a saying he liked, "What you truly give, you never lose." She still believed that, but she was beginning to understand that not everyone gives truly. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. 2 weeks later, Justin and Tiffany showed up at her house, unannounced. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Martha was in the garden tending to her plants, wearing a beige jacket, her white hair tied up messily, her hands in the dirt just the way she always liked. She heard the gate and went to see. They were both there, all dressed up, smiling, and Martha felt her heart tighten in a way that was hard to explain, because she still cared about them. She still loved her grandson with a love that has no off switch. They came in, sat down in the living room, and Martha made coffee. And then began a conversation she will never forget as long as she lives. Tiffany got straight to the point. She said she had found out about the situation, that she was worried about Martha, that a woman her age shouldn't be living alone in such a big house she could no longer afford to maintain. She said all of it with a smile that seemed kind, but had an undertone that Martha was seeing more and more clearly. "We were thinking, Mrs. Martha, that maybe it would be easier for you to sell this house. A house this size would fetch a good price, you'd be comfortable for a few years, and you could move into a smaller apartment or else—" "Or else what?" Martha asked quietly. Tiffany looked at Justin. Justin looked at the table. "We have a friend who runs an assisted living facility. Very well kept, very organized." Martha set her coffee cup down slowly on the table. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just sat there looking at the two of them with that calm gaze that people who have suffered a great deal have. A gaze that doesn't need words to say what it's feeling. "I'm fine right here," she said. "Thank you for your concern." The visit ended shortly after. When they left, Martha sat in Arthur's chair, that brown leather armchair she had never been able to throw out, and stayed there for a long time doing nothing. I had to stop here when I first read this, because it puts a weight on your chest that stays. A 72-year-old woman who raised this family with her own 2 hands, hearing that from the people she loved her whole life. But what Martha didn't know yet was that the story had another layer. Gladys found out first. She learned by chance, through a mutual acquaintance, that Justin had consulted an attorney 3 weeks earlier. The subject? Conservatorship. It was a legal process that, under certain circumstances, allowed someone to manage the assets of an elderly person deemed incapable of doing so on their own. The attorney had told Justin it would be difficult without proof of incapacity, but that, if there were a documented pattern of financial mismanagement, it could be a path forward. Gladys went to Martha the same day she found out. Martha listened while sitting, her hands in her lap. When Gladys finished speaking, she said only, "So it wasn't just curiosity. There was a plan." "Seems that way." They sat in silence for a while. "Gladys," Martha said after a moment, "do you know what this means?" Her friend waited. "It means that if I hadn't done what I did, if I had left everything where it was, visible, accessible, that boy could have tried to take control of what Arthur and I built in 50 years. She didn't say it with anger. She said it with a calm sadness, the kind that comes when disappointment has already passed the point of hurting and has just become a weight you carry. What came next was even harder. Susan showed up on a Thursday morning, also without calling ahead. Unlike her son, she came with red eyes as if she had been crying. She sat down in the kitchen and kept fidgeting with her purse strap, unable to start talking. Martha waited. "Mom, I found out that Justin went to see an attorney." "I found out too." Susan looked up. "You knew?" "I know now." "I didn't know before, Mom. I swear I didn't. When I found out, I went to fight with him. We had an ugly argument this week. I needed you to know that I had no part in this." Martha looked at her daughter. Susan was 45 years old, but at that moment she seemed younger. She seemed like the little girl she and Arthur had raised, the one who was afraid of the dark and slept with a rag doll until she was 12. "I believe you," Martha said, and it was true, she did. But believing didn't take away the pain. "Mum, what are you going to do?" Martha picked up the coffee cup that was on the table, took a sip, and said, "I still don't know, but I know I'm not going to do anything out of anger. I've never done anything important out of anger in my life." Susan left feeling a little lighter. Martha stayed in the kitchen alone, looking out the window at the garden. It was that week that she got sick. It wasn't anything serious, just an infection that kept her in bed for 5 days with a fever, no energy for anything. Gladys showed up every day, brought soup, brought medicine, sat by the bed, talking about anything, just so she wouldn't feel alone. Susan called every morning and every night. The other children sent messages. Justin sent a message on the second day. "Heard you're not feeling well. Hope you get better soon." That was it. Martha read that message lying down, with a fever, and thought, "That's it. That's what I needed to see. Not with judgment, with clarity." When she got better, she called her CPA and her attorney, a trusted man who had worked with the family for many years. She asked them to prepare everything. It was time to act. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. She invited Justin to lunch on Saturday. She also invited Susan. She said she wanted to talk with the family, that she had important things to sort out. Justin accepted. He showed up with Tiffany without asking if he could bring her. Martha had made lunch with her own hands, as she always did when the family got together. Pasta with marinara sauce that she learned from her mother, salad, that cornbread stuffing that Arthur loved and that she kept making even though only she knew how much it cost to prepare without him by her side. They sat at the table, they ate. The conversation was light, superficial, the kind of conversation that happens when everyone knows there's a big issue underneath, but nobody wants to be the first to bring it up. When lunch was over, Martha asked them to stay. She served coffee. And then she took an envelope from the pocket of her jacket. She placed it on the table. Justin looked at the envelope. Tiffany, too. Susan stayed quiet. "I want to tell you all something," Martha said, "and I ask that you let me finish before anyone speaks." No one said anything. She started from the beginning. She told them about Justin's call asking for the $3,000. She told them about the 4 months before, with no word from him. She told them about the feeling that she was being sought out of self-interest. She told them she had decided to run a test, that she had reorganized her finances, created the appearance of a difficult situation, and waited to see what would happen. Tiffany opened her mouth. Martha raised her hand gently. "I'm not finished yet." She continued. She told them about the visit from the two of them, about the suggestion to sell the house, about that assisted living facility. She told them she had found out about the attorney, about the research on conservatorship. She said it all with the same calm voice as always, without shouting, without crying, without dramatics, just the truth. Dry, heavy. Justin had turned pale. Tiffany was staring at the tablecloth. "I'm not telling you this to shame anyone," Martha said. "I'm telling you because at 72 years old, I learned that unresolved things turn into wounds, and I don't want wounds in the time I have left." She opened the envelope. She took out some documents and placed them on the table. "The money exists. The $2 million are where they always were, redistributed in the safest way I found. You never needed to do anything you did. I've always been generous with this family, I always have." Justin tried to speak. A different voice came out, lower, without his usual charm. "Grandma, it wasn't really like that." "Justin." Martha's voice was firm, but not cruel. "I've known you since the day you were born. I held you in my arms when you were hours old. I know when you're lying and I know when you're scared, so don't try to explain. Look at me and tell me the truth. Just once." The grandson remained silent. His eyes slowly began to fill. Tiffany put her hand on his arm, but Justin pulled away slightly. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but Martha saw it, and Susan saw it too. "I got carried away," he said at last. His voice was trembling. "Tiffany kept saying you had more than you needed, that you wouldn't even miss it, that it was only a matter of time before the family would have to take care of things anyway. And I just kept agreeing, because it was easier than arguing." Tiffany looked up. "Justin, you can't—" "Let it go," he told her. Just that. Then he looked at his grandmother. "I made a mistake, Grandma, in a way that I don't know if it can be fixed." Martha looked at her grandson for a long time. "This is the moment that stays with me, because it's not simple. It's not easy to look at the face of a child you loved, who grew up in your home, and see that they lost their way. But it's also not easy to be that child and realize all of a sudden the magnitude of the mistake they made." Tiffany excused herself and went to the bathroom. She didn't come back for a while. Susan said quietly, "Mum, I'm sorry. For everything." Martha looked at her daughter and nodded. Then she looked at Justin. "Do you know what hurt me the most?" she asked. "It wasn't the attorney. It wasn't the conservatorship thing. It was the message you sent when I got sick. One line, after everything." Justin said nothing. The tears slid down. "I don't need your tears right now," Martha said, not harshly but with seriousness. "I need to know that you understand, that it wasn't me who changed, that it wasn't the money that changed, that it was you who forgot where you came from." Justin nodded several times, like someone trying to hold on to every word. When Tiffany came back from the bathroom, Martha had already put the documents back in the envelope. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. There was something different in the air, heavier and at the same time cleaner, like when it rains after a long stretch of heat. Tiffany stood near the chair, not knowing whether to sit or stay standing. Martha looked at her and said, "You'll be able to speak whenever you want, but I'm going to need you to be honest." Tiffany took a deep breath. "I think I did him harm. It's not an excuse, it's just all I can say right now." Martha didn't answer right away. She let the words land. Then she said, "Family is a choice, you know. Every day we choose again, we choose to call, we choose to show up, we choose to be honest. It's not automatic, it's not guaranteed. It's work. She got up from the chair with that unhurried movement that 72 years bring, walked to the window, and stood looking out at the garden. Arthur used to say that money doesn't prove love. It never has, and it never will. What proves it is who shows up when you have nothing left to give. Justin got up from his chair and walked over to her. He stood beside her, looking out at the garden together. He didn't say anything, and sometimes not saying anything is the most honest answer there is. Martha placed her hand on his shoulder. They stayed like that for a moment. Susan began clearing the cups from the table without making a sound. Tiffany looked at the scene and stayed quiet too. There was an understanding there that she was still learning the scope of. In the days that followed, things didn't go back to normal overnight. That's not how it works, and Martha knew that. She didn't believe in quick reconciliations, the kind that make it seem like there was never a problem. She believed in the slow ones, the laborious ones, the ones that cost. Justin started calling more, not to ask how she was, to tell her about his day, to say he had made her pasta trying to follow the recipe, and it had come out only half right. She would laugh and say he needed more practice. With Tiffany, it was more gradual. There was a conversation the two of them had alone, one afternoon when Justin had gone out. Nothing dramatic, a woman-to-woman conversation about expectations, about what each one hoped for, about where they had drifted apart. It wasn't easy, but it was real. Susan started visiting every month, sometimes with no reason at all, just to have coffee and sit in the garden. And Gladys kept being Gladys, showing up every Tuesday for bridge and leaving 3 hours later, always with some new story to tell about the street where they lived. The money stayed right where it was. Martha wasn't in a hurry. She was careful about who she would leave it to one day and how, but she knew that day was still far off. And while it was far off, she had other things to take care of. The garden, her grandchildren, the 30-year friendship with the most honest woman she knew, the memories of Arthur that she kept like photographs tucked inside her chest. One Saturday morning, while having her coffee with milk and looking out the window, she thought about the decision she had made months before. That morning she had woken up with a certainty. Was it worth it? It depended on what you expected to find. If you expected to find perfect love, instant loyalty, guaranteed gratitude, then no. But if you expected to find the truth, to finally understand who you could count on and what could still be built, then yes, it was worth a lot. She didn't regret it. She never regretted wanting to know the truth, even when the truth hurt. And as the coffee cooled a little in her cup, she thought about Arthur, the way she did every day. She figured he would have approved. Not the test itself, maybe he would have called that dramatic, but the courage. That he would have recognized. He always said the hardest thing wasn't having money, it was knowing who you were when you had nothing else. She had spent her whole life trying to be that person. At 72, she had finally used that question as a tool, and the answer, when all was said and done, had come in the most human way possible, imperfect, painful, and still full of possibility. End of story. So what did you think? Was she right to test her grandchildren? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you would have done in her place. I'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for keeping us company. If this moved you, drop a like, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories like this one. See you on the next one.